Just fresh off the mail truck is the G.I. Joe 2-pack. This is the Steel Corps Commander, and this is the Twilight Guard. It is a Cobra versus G.I. Joe situation. There is a ton of accessories packed in here. Familiar characters, but a slightly different take on them. Let's get into it. Let's unbox the whole thing and talk about what I like, what I don't like, and what I might have changed. So let's start with some comparisons first, because the Twilight Guard as well as the Steel Corps Commander both come from G.I. Joe of the past, in a sense. So for the Steel Corps Commander, he used to be the Steel Brigade 1992 mail-away version. He had the gold helmet, the whole setup, the whole scheme behind the uniform for the commander is very reminiscent of that very specific special mail-away G.I. Joe figure. And when it comes to the Twilight Guard, I didn't think it was just a recolor of the Crimson Guard, but what it seemed like is a version of the 2005 Shadow Guard, which 2005, of course, being well after the Real American Hero run of G.I. Joe. So this is kind of a new character. I'll consider the Twilight Guard a new enough character that it doesn't have the same lineage, I feel, as the Steel Corps Commander. Now, if I say Steel Corps Commander or Steel Brigade Commander, sorry about that. It's just those two are very interchangeable in my head, even though I know for trademark purposes and all that legal mumbo-jumbo that this is the Steel Corps now, not the Steel Brigade. But let's take a look at what we get in the box, because we have two figures and we have just a ton of accessories surrounding them. And not only weapons accessories, we also have blast effects. And from what I can tell, every single one of these weapons has been used in some form or another on other G.I. Joe figures. It feels like there's some slight variation with the blast effects in terms of the coloring on some of the more like straight shot blast effects, but overall this is a reconfiguration of a lot of what we've experienced already in the G.I. Joe classified line. So how does it hold up? I think we can tackle each individual character separately, and then we'll talk about them as a package, because I think that is the intent here, is that they're trying to tell a story within the box. We're not getting a vehicle, we are getting two combatants locked in a struggle that start on a plastic blister. Now, starting with the Steel Corps Commander, I really like the paint scheme of this because the gold harkens back to some of the early waves of G.I. Joe Classified. The muted greens and the blues lend itself well to some of the other characters in the line, and when you stand this next to the other Steel Corps characters, you can get a sense that this guy, he's the leader of the bunch. What is sorely missing is the fact that he doesn't come with the jetpack. I would have loved to seen the jetpack with the Steel Corps Commander here. That is such a great trademark, that is a hallmark of the figure. I would have traded the blast effects for a backpack for this guy, because if we look at the Twilight Guard, you'll see there is a little asymmetry going on. But unfortunately, like a lot of other weapons in the G.I. Joe Classified series, it came pre-bent, which to me at this point is disheartening, it's sad, and I wish that would get figured out, because this has been a consistent problem for a while now, and to see the handguns come out like all bent and warped, just frustrating at this point. So that's something that I definitely don't like about this guy. It also goes across some of the other accessories, but just talking about the Steel Corps Commander here, the other thing that I would have changed is maybe just redefine his loadout a little bit. We know that from the other Steel Corps 2-pack that you can remove some of the armor and it gives you more articulation, but the intention, the character comes out of the box with all of this stuff geared up, and it severely limits the movement of it. I'm not really a big fan of the shoulder pads on the sides either because of the way that they're constructed. They come up from the bicep rather than what we've seen with the Techno Vipers and what was it, I think the Night Creeper. They were socketed in between the shoulder joint, which gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more range of motion. What you're going to end up doing here is if you have these in poses for too long, this plastic, this very soft plastic, is going to warp and it's going to not look recognizable on the shoulder if you keep it in that pose. So you're dealing with more subdued poses, you're dealing with more straight up and down, intimidating looks because he is a faceless character with a lot of armor. You can kind of get away with that, but overall, like, we've seen things done better since the initial run of the Steel Corps. So not to see some of those upgrades included, or even just swapping out some of the parts like the shoulders, is a little unfortunate. That's something I would have liked to see changed, just to not only set it apart from the other Steel Corps characters, but to give it that more flexibility, to give it that more range of motion. One of the things that I can't figure out for the life of me is that the holster on the back clearly holds his pistol, but then he also has a drop leg pistol holder, but I don't know exactly what weapon that goes for. And when we're talking about weapons, because he doesn't have a backpack and just a ton of weapons, this isn't one of those figures where you can store everything on them. You're going to need to make some choices. You're going to need to have a system, or not, I suppose, of storing the extra accessories somewhere where you can easily find them, swap them out if that's how you display your figures. That said, what do I like about him is that the areas of articulation that are not as obstructed still work really great. We have the double jointed elbows. You can see here that this guy really can bend that elbow back. You have the same motion on the legs. He can really kick back if you want him to. It's just that anything like torso above, shoulders are just going to be very static, very still. You can remove some of this armor. That will free him up to have more motion, but like I said earlier, the intention behind him, the way that he came loaded out, was this. The weapons that are earmarked for the Steel Corps Commander are really good. They're ones that we've seen before. They work well, they're imposing, they have that sci-fi / realistic, walking that tight line, and I think it works really well. The blast effects plug in, it makes it look really good, and even though you don't get that pose ability, you can make it action-oriented. So that's everything that I know about the Steel Corps Commander. Let's grab the Twilight Guard, because I think that's kind of the standout figure in this 2-pack. Here we have our Twilight Guard, and the immediate thing that you might recognize is that he has a soft goods cape. And the neat thing about it is that it's asymmetrical, so it sits over one shoulder. It looks very regal, it looks very edgy. This is something that you would want from a Cobra figure. Now, speaking of Cobra figures, we can clearly see where this was inspired from. This is essentially a Crimson Guard body, but with some added details. So we have things like this gear on his chest that I believe come from one of the Cobra infantry or Cobra officers, something like that. We also have some bicep armor over here with a special insignia on there. The helmet is really shiny. I love how that offsets the rest of the figure. There's just a lot going on here. He has swagger just based on how you can modify the pose ever so slightly so that it gives him an air of sophistication, maybe a little bit of arrogance. But the issue that I run into, something that I don't like about this figure, is that the weapons that are earmarked for the Twilight Guard are similar to the ones from the original Gung Ho, which are not some of my very favorite weapons, even though one of them looks like the Nerf Ultra 1. The reason for that is because the weapons are so difficult for them to grasp in their hands. Yes, we still have the issue that we had with the Steel Corps Commander, where one of them is bent just hilariously and frustratingly so. But there is a lot more posability, there is a lot more dynamic range with this character, which I think offsets the Steel Corps Commander rather well. So you have the one stoic hero on the side, and then you have this very arrogant character with a cape on the other side. Now, if we look at his face mask a little more closely, it's more of a gunmetal. It's not a very shiny chrome, which again, kind of lends itself well to this Twilight theme. There's hints of this character working really well with another Cobra troop builder, and it's on the inside of the arm, is the same color as the Techno Viper, not the one from the missile system, but just the normal, like, I guess, mainline wave one. You have this more reddish interior cape. This Twilight Guard, I feel, can go next to a lot of different Cobra figures and fit the role of a more elite, a more specialized member of the troop building squads. Now, similar to the Steel Corps Commander, the bicep armor here gives you limited range of motion, but not in the same way as the Commander. Because it doesn't go all the way up rounding the shoulder, you get a lot more lift with it. The difficulty that you do run into is that the cape up here is situated rather tightly. I would hate to be very rough with this cape because it is only situated by a very thin band, a soft goods band that sits across the rest of his gear that is molded plastic. But overall, like, I'm really impressed with this figure, and I think a lot of it has to do with the soft goods cape because it's done in a way that's not the Serpentor or the Dr. Mindbender thing that's very vintage inspired. This feels like a more modern take, a more like edgy take, a very Cobra regal, arrogant take, which is impressive considering that the Crimson Guard to begin with is a more retro inspired figure, and to modernize it in a way with just adding those few accessories really shows just how far you can go with some part swaps, some part new usage, all that kind of stuff when it comes to G.I. Joe Classified. So yeah, this guy right here is the standout figure, and he does offset well against the Commander. But let's talk about these two together, because you have to purchase them together, and you cannot buy them separately unless you're buying these off somebody on Facebook Marketplace, probably for a huge markup or something. I don't know. So yeah, the storytelling behind these two is interesting because you have one character who is a lot more poseable, a lot more nimble. You have the other one that's more stoic, who's more powerful, more armored up. And you get the sense of like an even match, but in different ways. So you have the Steel Corps Commander being very beefy and hulking, and then you have the Twilight Guard being more nimble, agile, stealthy. So this is a first for the G.I. Joe Classified series where we're getting one character from each faction in the box, which is a great way to introduce the battle between G.I. Joe and Cobra. And while I wish there would have been some changes to the Steel Corps Commander, I think having those two play off each other and the dynamics that happen just because of the posability or the lack thereof in the Commander's case gives you tension. It gives you a story to tell, the pull and push of the two factions warring endlessly forever. But the story is also part of the accessory kit. Even though we have seen these accessories before, it is an entire loadout. It is a footlocker full of weaponry, which overall is a good thing to beef up your ranks. So you could stage a scene in your display between these two and it would look great. Or you can stage these in their separate factions as the leader of their units, and that would look amazing too, swapping in and out the parts based on the scene that you're looking to tell. So without so much as a file card, this 2-pack tells a story. It tells a story of war, it tells a story of Cobra and Joe, and it tells a story of two different philosophies of fighting a battle. While looking at each individual figure, their pros, their cons, their deficiencies, the things that are amazing about them, it doesn't tell the complete story. Breaking up the set, I feel, just isn't the way to go. So that's everything that I know about the Twilight Guard and the Steel Corps Commander. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think these should individually stand on their own, or do you think that it's okay to have them together and to look at them as a single unit? Well, I guess warring unit. And if you like things like G.I. Joe, Marvel Legends, Star Wars Black Series, and other cool collectibles around the 6-inch scale, if you like pop culture things and things below the 6-inch scale that are just fun and collectible and nerdy and cool, or Nerf blasters, because you can't have an action toy channel without Nerf blasters. You gotta follow along, you gotta know what's coming next, because there are more videos coming next. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.